Jacqueline Anderson from Everett, Washington. And I want to talk about an experience that I had because of my son being involved with a young woman. We experienced a lot of sadness. This young woman who had apparently grown up in an abusive home came to my son because she wanted support from him, and he cared, and he was very loving and kind with her. As a result, I won't go into all the details, but as a result, it turned out that actually she used him as she used me. In the interim, she and my son became lovers. They had 2 children together. During this relationship, we experienced a lot of violence from this young lady who came from an abusive background, and we don't have that kind of family or lifestyle. So it's been kind of an exercise in futility, realizing that there are people like that. I didn't even know it. I mean, I didn't come from that kind of background. And this girl turned every single solitary nice thing that I did for her against me. She tried to cause a rift with my son and I. This relationship between this young woman and my son went on for about 8 years, including my grandchildren, 2 wonderful little boys that I love very much. This girl, because of her deceitfulness, brought in the police by, she decided that she didn't want to be with my son, and that she would just go ahead and take the 1 child that she had. She told me when she was 9 months pregnant that as soon as the baby was born, she was leaving. She was living in my home, taking advantage of my good nature, my kindness. She had keys to my home, use of my phone. Anyway, it was her home. My son and this young lady moved out. They took the little boy with them when I guess he was about 3 or 4 months old. Of course, I was extremely excited about the fact that this little boy came to live at my house because it was my first grandchild. Anyway, in the ensuing years, or months, I guess I should say, they depended on me for babysitting whenever I was available. When I wasn't at work or I had free time, then I would watch the baby or spend time with him. He and I became very close. He became very dependent upon me because there was a lot of bickering going on over at the house where they lived. She was never satisfied with anything that my son did for her. She slapped him. I saw her abuse him. I saw her scratch him with her fingernails. I saw her scream at him at the top of her lungs for no good reason because she was emotionally disturbed. I couldn't understand how this was going on, but anyway, it was my opinion that my son was very patient with this person and very giving and very loving, and he refused over this whole period of time, he refused to believe that she didn't love him. He thought she was just mixed up and that she needed his support. He cared so much for this girl, and she didn't want to have he wanted to marry her. He asked her to marry him at least 5 times. She wanted an open relationship. So even after they had their own apartment and now had a second child, she was having relationships with other men. Now, I think it takes a heart of steel to put up with that sort of a relationship with a woman. My son didn't want anything to happen to his children, so he stuck with this girl, even though she was slapping him all the time. She would come at him with box knives, and Unbelievable liar. Anyway. So I was watching all this, standing by, realizing that grandmas cannot run their children's lives. But I was trying to be protective of this little boy. And then, of course, the next child came along. Now, here's a girl who, she told me that she thought she could do better, but then she went on and had a second child with him, still wasn't married to him. She was using him. Then she started calling the police and having the police come to the apartment and saying that he was beating her. The man that lived next door in the apartment, next door to them, I ran into him at the grocery store one time, and he said, geez, I sure do feel sorry for your son, because if he only knew how many men were coming and going from that apartment during the day while he was at work. And never mind the fact that there were children there. Anyway, the manager of that apartment complex told me that that this woman, well, I better back up a little bit, and I don't want to miss anything here. So she decided that she would take up methamphetamines, and she was smoking pot while she was also having sex with other men. And then she would slap my son and yell at him and tell him to shut up and mind his own business. And she was just unbelievable, unbelievable. So anyway, it came to this big blowout, and one day my son called me up and he said, Mom, I hit her and I don't know what to do, and I have the oldest boy, his name is Patrick. I have him with me. And I said, oh, you can't do that because she'll call the police and say that you've taken him. And so he met me, and I took the little boy back to her, to the apartment. And in the meantime, her mother was there with some other woman, and they called me a dirty name when I went there right in front of my grandson. You know, and I was trying to do the right thing. So this is the sort of environment that this young lady grew up in, and no wonder she was abusive and violent. Her mother was that same kind of person. And I believe that everything that this girl was, of course, she learned from her mother. She watched what she was doing. I'm not going to go into that because that's not important. But what happened after that, because my son hit the girl, my son went to the police because I told him that I thought that it would be better for him if he went to the police and admitted that he had hit this girl. And he did hit her with his fist in the middle of her, right in here. And so she had 2 black eyes. Now, after that, all hell broke loose, and he became a monster, and she became Miss Goody Two-Shoes. And the police came, of course. And even though my son went on his own to the police and told them exactly what he had done, now there's a police report that they had to come out, and they had to take photographs of her bruised face, and she had to go to the hospital. And so I went to the hospital to see if she was all right, and I asked her if she'd like to have you know, something to eat because it had been a hard day. I went out and got a hamburger for her, and when I got back, there was some man there that I didn't know from Adam who came to see if she was all right. And when they released her, she left with him. So anyway, it's safe to say that the girl really was a trollop, and she knows that I think that of her, so it's not a big surprise. Anyway, we decided that we needed to get an attorney because obviously the 2 children were involved. All during this whole situation, while after this big blowout happened, my son moved back home with me, and the little boy, eventually, the oldest one, came to live with us, and I believe that he was about 3 at that point. He may have been 2.5, but anyway, he came to live with us because the CPS worker who went out to her apartment which my son paid the rent for, and it was in his name, and all of his belongings were there. But she said, oh, yeah, no, she didn't want to have anything more to do with him because he was a monster and all other kind of vile names. Anyway, the little boy came to live with us, and he lived with us for 11 and a half months. Even though my son didn't file right away for parenting package because we didn't know exactly what we should do, and he was so in love with this girl that he just thought that it would be okay eventually. I guess he was just either naive or just a nice guy. I don't know what his problem was. Anyway, he loved her, and a lot of times when you love someone, I guess you can't think straight. So anyway, now the police are involved. So I engaged an attorney, and I paid for it. And anyway, we didn't care for that attorney, so there was something that he wasn't doing the way I thought it should be done. And so I guess my son said, no, that's okay, I don't want to do business with you. So he reimbursed me the monies that he hadn't used up yet, and we found a different attorney that we thought would be more capable. In the meantime, this girl is calling up my son on his cell phone and having these guys that are living at my son's apartment that he's paying the rent for, and the little children are there, and these guys are calling up and telling my son all these disgusting things that they're doing. I listened to the cell phone call, so I knew what was going on. These guys are telling him what they're doing to her sexually. Now, that would enrage most men who might love someone. And also, he was enraged because his children were there. So anyway, at this point now, the oldest little boy is living with us because the CPS person sent him over to us. We went to the security department that takes care of child support. And eventually it went to court, and the judge did get a statement from the mother saying that yes, that was fine with her, that the little boy was living with him, and that she did know that that was the fact. So for 11 and a half months, that little boy was in his daddy's custody. She, in the meantime, was hiding the other little boy from my son and from me. But when the other little boy, the youngest one, got sick, and at this point he was still an infant, or a little young child, less than a year old. If he got sick, she would bring him over to my house for me to take care of, even though I was still working. And then we would have to call babysitters to come and take care of the children during the day while I went to work, and Eric had to pay for those babysitters. And while she was doing nothing, she was living on welfare or whatever. My son asked the police if he could go to his apartment that he was paying the rent on to get a truck to go and pick up his belongings that he'd had, that I gave him, the things that I bought him and things that he had collected over the years that he had long before he met this girl. Now, mind you, this girl is calling him her ex to the police. The police, not bothering to get the facts, assumed that they were divorced. So in the state of Washington, of course, everything that is the husband's also belongs to the wife. And so they said, oh no, that's okay. You can't, she said he couldn't have his things when they took a truck to her apartment, or to my son's apartment, and he couldn't have his things. So to make a long story short, she pawned everything of value. She threw his collections in the garbage. She took his furniture. She threw away whatever that I had given anyway, and the police let her do it. It was okay with them. They didn't care. So, and every single time that she had something that she thought, some way that she thought that she could somehow maneuver this situation, she would call and press charges against my son, call the police and have him go to my house and have him arrested, saying that he was making phone calls to her, or that he was stalking her, or all kinds of things. I try to put it out of my head. So anyway, the police came to my house. Now, my neighbors are starting to wonder, what's wrong over there at their house? Yeah, so anyway, the police, we had the experience with the police. They didn't allow my son to get his belongings, so he has no rights. He didn't have the right to have that. We had an attorney who said that he could handle municipal court, but he couldn't. When it came to shove, all these charges that my son was in court probably every 3 months he was in court. And pretty soon it created problems with his employer because he was always having to go to court all the time. And then if he was in jail, I would have to put up the bond so that he could get out, so that he could go to work. So anyway, this was beginning to become a traumatic experience for both of us. Plus, I still had the oldest child living with us in our home. Then this girl decided that she could drop in to the house anytime that she wanted to visit my son, even though there had been a court order saying that she wasn't allowed to do that. Our attorney, well, I guess I better back up. The commissioners listened to all of the information that our attorney put forward, and they listened to all the information that her attorney put forward. This woman, who was her attorney, worked for the free attorney system in Snohomish County. So any woman who has been abused gets free attorney. In the meantime, I'm paying my attorney money to go to court, and this woman, who's the free attorney, drags out all kinds of stuff, sends him paperwork that's irrelevant, has nothing to do with anything. So, she's playing a little game. And also involved with that, which I thought was kind of strange, the assistant prosecuting attorney for the city of Everett sat on the board of directors for that particular group of attorneys, and every single solitary time that we were about to go to court for some important thing, somehow my son had to end up going into municipal court all of a sudden. So it was really kind of interesting how this assistant prosecuting attorney, who was obviously communicating with this woman that was his attorney, court appointed, for free. Anyway, the money's going out, Then the court appointed a guardian ad litem. The guardian ad litem was supposed to protect the children. That's the whole point of having a guardian ad litem. They're supposed to care and protect the children. So the guardian ad litem comes out to my house to see if this is a decent environment for the children. What kind of people are these? And I had shown an interest in having custody of the children because I thought at least I could provide a good home for them while the rest of all of this melted away. That guardian ad litem said, I was 63 years old at the time, that guardian ad litem said, "Oh, you're too old, you couldn't possibly raise these children." He spent 15 minutes in my home. He decided that the children didn't really care about their daddy, that it was their Grammy that they liked. And then at the same time, he informed me that I was too old to do this. Well, I'm the best judge of whether I'm capable of doing that or not. I was still employed, and I made a very good living, and I didn't really appreciate the attitude. But, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not in the court system. I don't know. I'm relying on their judgment because I like my clients to listen to what I have to say, so I thought that I would listen to them. I was beside myself too because I was extremely emotionally involved in the whole situation. So we go to court, and the girl, every August and every March, she did the same thing. She would come home or come to my house to stay. And I said to my son, I don't want her in my house. Well, he'd say, but Mother, then we get to see the children. We get to have the children. So at one point, after she filed this this order against him, saying that he shouldn't be with his children because he was such a monster, and her attorney, I think they're the same kind of people, she went along with all this stuff, and actually she even submitted a paper to the court saying that I had been diagnosed with psychiatric problems, which is a complete lie. I've never been to a psychiatrist. I should go now. Anyway, so then she introduced this fax declaration that was written by this friend of hers, who is a known drug dealer. She has been a prostitute, and she also uses methamphetamine. She attested to the fact that my son tried to kill this girl, tried to strangle her, and that she entered the house at one time and observed this. Anyway, she went to great lengths to tell this story. So now my son is a really horrible monster, because not only did he hit this girl, supposedly, which he did do, and who blames him, and then, now this other girl is lying. And of course the CPS woman who interviewed both of these girls said that they were two lovely girls, two very sweet, lovely girls. And I tried to talk to this CPS woman, and obviously she thought that my son and I were too emotionally involved in this situation, that we were just a little bit off our nut, and who wouldn't be at this point. So anyway, I'm not sure, so much went on. You see, we were in court for 2 years, in family law court for 2 years. The money was rolling out. My attorney was charging me $600 an hour for every single time we went to court. And her attorney, who's getting free legal service, she takes as long as she can in court. She makes as much out of everything she possibly can. Blah, blah, blah. So after it being in family law court for, I guess it was about a year and a half, the guardian ad litem and my son's attorney decided that the best thing that we could do is, and this is of course not in court, this is over coffee or whatever, decide that the best thing to do is have it go into dependency and have the Department of Social and Health Services weed through this problem and see if they can correct it. And so as my understanding of the Department of Social and Health Services, they're supposed to help both parties, both the mother and the father. Now, I want to reiterate the fact that we were the plaintiff. We started this case in court because we were concerned about the welfare of the children. We did not want them in an environment where they were being put in jeopardy. She was putting them in an environment where they were subjected to methamphetamines, and I had that by the manager of the apartment informed me of that. And she was evicted, by the way, for that reason. The children were subjected to sexual things going on in the apartment. Little children don't need to be witnesses to that sort of thing. And men coming in, going out, day, night, all kinds of them. And some of those men actually because they didn't like her, they actually testified on behalf of my son in court as to the kind of woman she was. Now, it doesn't really matter that she was that sort of individual or that she is that sort of individual. The Department of Social and Health Services, after an entire year of investigating the situation, returned the children to her custody. But now I'm going to digress a little bit and give you a little bit of information about what happened with the Department of Social and Health Services. So we're the plaintiff. We have facts. We introduce facts, and facts from the CPS who came out in 2005, or maybe it was before that, and then the CPS who came out in 2006. So now the CPS person who wrote up the statement, the initial statement, said that my son was emotionally sick because he had taken all of these photographs of the children. Now, I want to back up a little bit and tell you that my son took photographs of the children because our attorney told him to take photographs of the children when they arrived for their visitation and when they left our home, so that we had proof that we weren't the ones who were beating the children or causing them to fall and hurt themselves or all the rest of it. So he put in the thing that my son was emotionally sick because he did that. And then now it turns out that my son is a druggie because he smokes marijuana. And that's a terrible, terrible criminal thing, as we know, in our country. And that's sarcasm. and as long as we don't inhale, I guess it's all right. So he twisted about every single solitary thing around so that it sounded like my son was the monster that hit her in the face, which was what came out of family law court. Now we're supposed to have, everybody's supposed to have a court-appointed attorney when you go into the Department of Social and Health Services. So she got an attorney, and my son got an attorney. But by the way, he had to go to jail because of some of the false things that she had testified to. So he's down at the county jail while she's in there with her Miss Goody Two-Shoes deal. Okay, it's obvious that this girl has a background of abuse from her home. It's on record in the state of Washington, the Department of Social and Health Services and CPS. There's nothing in there at all whatsoever about my son being beaten or any kind of problems in his life. So now he becomes this monster, and he's in jail, so they have to send somebody down, send the free attorney down to interview him. And I don't know what they do in juvenile court or the Department of Social and Health Services, but I know that they decided along the way that the mother should have the child back, or the children back, and the father had no rights. For some reason, the first attorney decided not to continue. She had a large caseload or something, so they appointed another attorney who did absolutely nothing. He sat in every single solitary court situation, said nothing, did nothing, didn't even give my son the paperwork from the system. And I kept thinking, what is going on? And I tried to go to his office and talk to him. In the meantime, I was the court-appointed foster care for my grandchildren. They came to live with me, and I said, thank God I can keep track of them, and I know they're all right. And we were having a wonderful time together. The youngest child couldn't even climb up on the kitchen stool. He was he was 2.5 years old, and he couldn't even get up on the kitchen stool. He couldn't climb the stairs to get into my house because he didn't know how, and he was afraid to. He had to be carried up the steps. He couldn't communicate. He didn't know how to communicate because his mother didn't provide a decent home for him, and all that time that she was keeping him from us and taking him from this place to that place. And anyway, so I took him to, as a foster care parent, I took him to the Little Red Schoolhouse so that we could evaluate him and see if we couldn't get some training for the little boy and get him some help. And I taught him how to get up on the stool, and I taught him how to walk up the steps, and I taught him that everything was okay. And he said, "Grammy, will you keep me?" So anyway, I know this is a very long story, and it's a very horrible story, and so after 8 years of all of this horror, they took the children, returned them to the mother. Well, before that, she had her first 2-day visit with them, and overnighter. And the social worker didn't even bother to tell me, the foster care parent, that the children were going to be overnight for 2 nights. He just neglected to tell me that, so I had no knowledge of where these little children were and what was going on. So anyway, the little boy, my little Patrick, came back home. He was going to turn, well, he had just turned 5 actually. This was in August of 2008. And I was fixing dinner, and he came out to the kitchen and asked me if he could help me. We always worked together in the kitchen. And he said, "Grammy, my mommy hit me in the chest while I was over at her place." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, she hit me with her fist." And I said, "Well, why would she do that?" And he said, "She was mad at me." And I said, "Well, pull up your shirt and let me see." So he pulled up his shirt, and there was a red mark, and kind of looked like she had hit him with a ring or something. So I was upset, and I realized I had to think about it, and I realized that as a foster care parent, it was my responsibility, according to the RCWs, to report this matter. So I called the social worker. He had gone home for the day, but I had his voicemail line. I called and told him what had transpired, according to Patrick. Patrick stuck by his story. He told the CPS worker the same thing. He told everybody, as far as I know, that I took him to the hospital the next day because I wanted to have documentation that she had hit him, number one, and number two, I wanted to make sure that he was okay, that she hadn't injured him somehow because she hit him right square in the chest. So yes, indeed, he did have a bruise on his sternum. And so anyway, I was interviewed by 6 different people at the hospital, and they all said that I wasn't responsible for this. The police came. The police officer interviewed me. The police officer said I wasn't responsible for this. That was on August 8th. On August 19th, the CPS worker, who had, by the way, come out to my house to interview the little boy and took him into a separate room and closed the door to talk with him. I don't know what went on in that room. He certainly could have interviewed him in the same room. I would have been happy to leave the room. Anyway, he called me at home and told me that they were going to file charges against me for hitting my grandson and coaching him to say that his mother did it. And of course now I'm going, oh my God, it's time for me to retire in life, and I'm going to spend my last remaining years in jail because they're going to file charges against me. And already having been through the court system, realizing what a fiasco it was, how no one cared whether you told lies or told the truth. No one cared. The next day, and he told me that I had to appear. No, it was the next morning I got a phone call. They told me I had to appear in a family planning meeting down at DSHS. So I went. I took the children to daycare on that day. I went to the family planning meeting, and nothing was said by the CPS officer who called and said that they were going to file charges against me. It was all, my son and I had a long conversation, and we decided that because I didn't want to be manipulated by this lying, deceitful woman anymore, that I wanted out of the situation. Surely DSHS would do the right thing. No, DSHS doesn't do the right thing. And they have a bunch of people working there who are, I think these people that work for the Department of Social and Health Services are so accustomed to dealing with people who are psychiatrically disturbed or whatever, that they wouldn't know good people when they come in front of them. And they wouldn't know the truth if it flew up and hit them in the face. Time after time, I told this social worker that this little boy, Patrick, who had lived with us for 11 and a half months, I told him that Patrick wanted to live with us, and he kept telling me that he wanted to live with us. Grammy, I don't want to live with my mommy. I don't like my mommy. She's mean. She hits me. I don't want to live with my mommy. I want to live with you and Daddy. And I told the social worker that, and he said, well, too bad. Little children don't get to decide who they live with. So they gave him back to her. And they didn't file charges against me. But I didn't get to say goodbye to my grandchildren, and I haven't seen them. I didn't get to say goodbye to them. And little Patrick trusted me so much. He kept saying, Grammy, what are we going to do? And I kept saying, don't worry, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. And God loves you. Don't forget that God loves you. I mean, this is a little boy who lived in my house all this time. We did all kinds of wonderful things. We played with crayons together. We built modeling with model clay. We played cars together. We went to the park. We threw frisbees. I mean, whatever you do with your grandchildren. I taught him his ABCs. I taught him how to add and subtract to 10, count to 10. After all, you have 10 fingers. Anyway, I taught him how to multiply. If you have 2 times 5, you have 10. He wasn't even in school yet. And I enrolled him in school because he was going to be starting kindergarten. So anyway, the little child was so excited. He didn't know what to do with himself. He couldn't wait to get to school. He said to me one time, we were talking about how beautiful his hands were, and he said, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, Grammy, but you know, I am already an artist. And he was, and he is, because he drew pictures for me, and I have them hanging all over my house. And I still have them hanging all over my house. I said, well, you could be an artist, or you could play the guitar. You have wonderful hands, or you could be a surgeon. You could be a doctor. You could help people. His daddy taught him not to swear. He told him that honorable men don't swear. And he taught him not to say the F word. The other little one would use the F word every time he came back from a visitation with his mother. And I would say, no, 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 you don't talk that way, because nice little boys don't talk that way. Anyway, I tried as hard as I could to teach them. And anyway, I didn't get to say goodbye to them. And the next day, the CPS worker came out to my house and picked up their toys and their clothes like it didn't matter to me. And I had to pack up all their things. And of course, I didn't pack up all their things, because Grammys don't give away their grandchildren's toys. And besides, I thought they would be coming back. And that was in 2008. And in 2010, I was volunteering at the food bank, and this woman and her new husband, whatever. Anyway, they came into the food bank with the children. And, of course, I hadn't seen them for 2 years, and I didn't know what to say. You see, in the meantime, this woman, I'm the grandma, I didn't do anything to these children, but I wasn't allowed to see them either because she was moving from one place to the next, and she had a confidential address, and after all, my son was a monster. And so, and because I told the truth about her in the court papers, I said everything that she did. We're entitled to write a declaration. But the court didn't care. They gave the children back to her anyway, even though she had been doing meth and being a prostitute and dealing marijuana. It doesn't matter. The police were watching my house, and one police officer who came during the situation that was going on said, I had to go to my car to get something, and I was outside, and I went to my car to get something, and he said, "Is that your car?" And I said, "Yes." I wouldn't go to that car to get something if it wasn't my car. And he said, "Oh, I thought you were driving a red car." He had been following me. That police officer had been stalking me. I don't have a record. I've never done anything illegal in my life except get a ticket because I like to drive fast because I have places to go. The last ticket I got, by the way, was because I was on my way to the Dairy Queen to get Patrick a chocolate milkshake, and we were in a hurry. So anyway, so I got a ticket. That's still on my driving record. Throughout this entire thing, the reason why we went to an attorney was because we needed help. We didn't know how to solve this problem. He left in the middle of the case. He and his guardian had lied him that he thought would be perfect, which apparently he and the commissioner and, I don't know, behind the scenes somehow they decided that this guardian ad litem should be appointed. All these different times that she had the police called, and we went to municipal court, in and out, in and out, in and out. The municipal court, the capacity for the court was 60. The capacity of the court is 60. It said on the wall in the little plaque. And there was standing room only in that court. And most of those people in that court had to have public defenders because they were vagrants or whatever. They couldn't afford, and neither could we because we already had spent all of our money. Anyway, I just thought, this is just a fiasco. Everybody's guilty. They're all going to the jail. We have a brand new jail in Snohomish County, by the way, so they have to pay for it somehow. There's when we had to go to municipal court and my son needed to have a public defender, they didn't understand the case. They didn't know the games that were going on. They didn't believe him. He tried to tell him. I went with him every single solitary time. I went through this whole thing with him. I know exactly what transpired. No one cared. And one time the judge, this is a great story, this judge decided that the police officer came up to the stand to testify to the situation. This is another deal where my son was guilty of calling this girl, and the police officer testified to the fact that it was my son who called because he recognized his voice. I'm sorry, but he wasn't personally involved with my son. He wasn't personal friends with him. How is this police officer capable of recognizing someone's voice? Well, anyway, the police officer made the mistake of saying that he was the law. Someone asked him how he knew that my son was guilty, and he said, because I'm the law. And the judge jumps up out of his chair. He's wearing the judge's gown, and he's swinging his arms. He looked like a raven, and he said, I'm the law. Very impressive. I thought, it's too bad we don't have that on film, or someplace where we could show that to somebody, what a fool this man is. He's supposed to be a municipal court judge in the city, and he's acting like a fool, jumping out of his chair and swinging his arms like a bird about ready to take off in flight. So I do not have any respect for the police in Everett. There may be 1 or 2 nice police officers, maybe there are 3. I don't have any respect for the municipal court judges because I don't think they're honest. And I don't think they care whether a person is guilty or innocent. They're going to send them to jail, and they're going to fine them some exorbitant rate because they have to pay for the new jail. It's assumed in the state of Washington that the man, no matter what is going on in the real truth of the situation, it's assumed that the man is guilty and the woman is innocent. No matter what, no matter what. It's really horrible. I was married to a man, and this has nothing to do with this situation, but I was married to a man who I was in love with, and he decided, he came home from a soccer game one night and decided to beat the hell out of me, and I ended up in the emergency room, and I didn't know what I had not done anything to deserve that. And of course they asked me, this was in the state of Oregon, they asked me if I'd like to file charges against him, and of course I said, why, I would never think of doing that. It would be, that would be terrible to do that because I wouldn't want to hurt his mother and father, and what about my mother and father, and, all that. But never mind that my eye had been sent cattywampus and I had bruising all over my face. I know what it's like to be beat up by somebody, and my son did not ever beat up this girl, though I wanted to. It was my understanding that CPS would investigate the matter and that they would look at it from all different sides and help us. That was the whole purpose of it. CPS doesn't investigate. They could care less. They actually had me being the visitation supervisor for that girl when the children came to visit her at the Department of Social and Health Services. I said, you can't have me doing that. She and I are enemies. We're not on the same team. You can't have me be a visitation supervisor. I don't know. I could not understand what was going on. No one would listen. No one cared. I presented the social worker with the family law court file, verbatim, page after page, a stack of paperwork, so that he could read up on it and understand how the court was going. I talked to him like a Dutch uncle. I tried to get him to understand that she was deceitful. She played all kinds of mind games. That she was not an appropriate person to be having children. In the end of the trial, when he got up to testify in the court, the social worker who decided that the children should be returned to the mother said, well, it is true that she isn't really a very good character. I can't remember, those weren't the exact words, but he finally said that. Oh, my son made a poor choice for the mother of his children. That's what she said, or he said. So Superior Court, the Superior Court judge only heard what her attorney allowed to be put into the court. The entire file for from her background, her family background, and all of her activities that she went through, all of our testimony, everything that had ever gone in, never was heard by the judge that was going to form the parenting plan. And so he went by every single solitary thing that this woman said about my son, about what a horrible man he was. Although I think after a while, 3 days this court went on, by the way, because the free attorney could once again clock some more money out of my bank account. And she took 3 whole days for this. Same, she repeated, she questioned the people that came to testify on his behalf. She questioned them over and over again, said the same thing 3 or 4 different ways, and their answer was still the same. Anyway, in the end, the judge allowed the defendant's attorney to write the parenting plan. And she put things in there that had already been legally decided weren't part of the situation. She had gone out of her way to say that my son was an alcoholic, and it had already been proven that he wasn't an alcoholic. He had been court-ordered in family law to go to for an entire year. He had to go to an abuse program so that he could learn not to be an abusive person. And every week I think I paid for it because he was short of cash at the time. It was $140, I think, every week. And juvenile court was, the Department of Social and Health Services was supposed to pay for that originally, but they closed the case, so they didn't have to pay for it. And then when I submitted the documents to the Department of Social and Health Services, they said, oh no, he was supposed to pay for it, and so they wouldn't reimburse me. And it was well over $1,000 that I paid for that. Anyway, so her attorney was allowed to write the family, the entire document that was used in the parenting plan. And she left in all that stuff, that he was an alcoholic and that he needed to go for a year's domestic violence training, and that he needed to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist for a year. Now, it was completely ignored that he had an evaluation in the very beginning of the family law court, and the psychological evaluator said that he obviously had suffered emotional trauma from this relationship with this girl, and that it would be beneficial to him to have psychological counseling. And I have provided that paperwork to you along with the rest of this file so that you know the truth about all of these things that have happened. The entire file that I submitted to the family law court, or to the Superior Court trial judge after all this happened, and we wanted to modify the parenting plan, and it was returned to us, and I went through this. We went through every piece of evidence. We filed it, and everything was correctly done. It was a thick file, and he returned it to me saying that we hadn't filed it within 15 days from the time that the parenting plan closed. And you can file a modification to a parenting plan anytime. You don't have to file it within 15 days. Well, my son hasn't seen his children. I saw them at the food bank, and they looked at me in total shock when I called out their name, because their mother was having the new husband take the children to the car. She didn't even allow their grandmother, who had been loving and kind to them, and they loved so much, she didn't even allow them to talk to me or let me hug them or anything. While they were in my foster care, by the way, she told her own children that their father was dead. And they came home from their visitation with her, and they were crying. Both of them were crying. And I said, what on earth is the matter? What is wrong with you guys? Why are you crying? And Patrick said, oh, Grammy, I'm so sad because my daddy is dead. And I said, what? Where did you get that idea? And he said, that's what Mommy told us. And he was 5 and the other one was 3, and she told these children that their daddy was dead. I said, well, that's not even true, so I'll have to get him on the phone so you can talk to him. And this, of course, he wasn't allowed to see his children because the social worker had decided that he shouldn't see his children. He had some kind of a trumped-up deal that he was working on. I don't have any respect for the Department of Children's Protective Services. Look at what they did to those little boys. They returned those darling little boys that belonged to that family where the mother was missing and the father was living here in Washington, and he murdered them. I don't think Children's Protective Services knows how to deal with the truth. They said to me that they had decided that I hit I hit my grandson in the chest after that situation, and that I coached him to lie. Then they submitted that and slandered me in court, in juvenile court. They slandered me, and they didn't even allow me to testify on my own behalf or submit a declaration. They slandered me. And I went to an attorney about that, and I said, now this is a completely different attorney. And I said, don't I have rights? Don't I have some? Oh, he said, oh, it's a waste of time. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Everybody knows that everybody lies in court. It doesn't matter. So I submitted a declaration on my own. I don't know whether they ever got it or not, but I just decided I was going to say what I had to say. And while all this was going on in an 8 years period of time, we had gone to the ombudsman in Olympia asking for help, and they didn't do anything for us. Their caseload, as I understand it, I found out later on, is about 3 years behind. I overheard that on television. I was watching a program about it. Yeah, their caseload is so behind, they don't have time to check up on CPS or DSHS to find out what they're doing. I wrote a letter to Christine Gregoire, and she didn't even answer it. She didn't care either. So anyway, I don't have any respect for the governor's office. I don't have any respect for the police. I don't have any respect for the Department of Social and Health Services or Children's Protective Services. They're not a protective service. They don't care. They don't listen to what you say to them. They don't care. They just do whatever they say. So I think our legal system stinks. And I probably could tell you so much more, but that's it. Yeah, 8 years of hell.